Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to the first of our Social Impact Careers Week events. My name is Mia Farina, and I'm the Public Service Careers Coach here in the central office of Cornell Career Services. So you may wander by your college career office. If you are around campus, you might see them more often. We are also here in Barnes Hall, which is next to the bookstore, across from Willard Straight. So you are welcome to use either or both of those resources throughout your time here at Cornell. We're happy to assist you. We have for you tonight a wonderful panel of alumni who will be sharing their wisdom with you. I also want to give a shout out to my colleague Anu Lyons, who is the director in ILR Career Services, who will be helping kind of monitor some of the chat and drop links for you all that will be helpful throughout. So we'll go ahead and get started and let the panelists introduce themselves as part of this first question. And Anu will also be putting their LinkedIn bios or links in the chat if you wanted to look up more about them as we're talking. But yeah, you'll have a chance to answer or ask questions at any point throughout the event. Feel free to put them in the chat and we can kind of interject if it makes sense, or we'll also have some time at the end dedicated just for you. So with that being said, housekeeping aside, thanks for joining, and we'll start with asking folks to share a brief overview of how you ended up in your current position, as well as literally just introducing yourself. So whoever would like to go first can go ahead.
I'll start. Everyone, I'm Erin Elsa Lopez. I am a managing director of investments at Momentous Capital. That is a community development finance institution. And I've been doing impact investing for my entire career. I went to Cornell for undergraduate, graduated in 2007. I went straight through to the Brooks School, that's called now, the MPA school, and I graduated in 2009. And so I have been doing impact investing in private equity, private credit space, mostly on the international emerging market side. And now I do it for US-based businesses. And while at graduate school at Cornell, that's when I took all of the international business, international development classes that the MPA program is quite flexible with. I was able to carve out my curriculum. I took classes at the business school, took classes at human ecology, policy. I took all classes everywhere. So that was one of the great things about my my graduate program. That's it. Thanks, you all.
Hi, I'm Claire O'Brien. I'm a senior climate resilience specialist at the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. Williams BA in Asian Studies 2015, and then pretty much straight to Cornell for the Master's in Public Administration. Most of my internships were in the nonprofit space, but I focused on government for my job search for reasons we can get into later. And actually kind of maybe similar to what some of you may be dealing with now, I had a provisional offer from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau for after I graduated, which was put on ice because of a federal hiring freeze, because of the same president that we have now. So pivoted and ended up at the Port Authority, which was a state agency and less impacted at that time by some of the federal craziness that was going on. And I've been there for 8 years, first through the rotational program, and then ended up falling in love with kind of the intersection of aviation and sustainability. So I'm currently working on climate risk assessments for JFK, Newark, and LaGuardia airports. Pleasure to be with you all.
Miranda, you want to go?
Yeah, I'll jump in quick and then pass it over to you, Josh. Hi, everybody. Great to meet you all and see all of you joining us. My name is Miranda Santillo. I graduated from Cornell Human Ecology from my undergraduate in 2017. I studied human development and had my minor in policy analysis and management. After Cornell, unlike some of the other panelists that just spoke, I jumped around a whole bunch in my career thus far. After Cornell, I worked in the Mississippi Delta with Teach for America. And then I jumped back to my hometown, which is Rochester, New York, and I worked for the mayor's office in the city of Rochester to help launch our Office of Community Wealth Building, where I designed and implemented financial empowerment programs that were integrated into existing social services. That experience working in city government, designing programs intended for local residents, was really the impetus for me to then pursue my graduate degree in social work and social policy. Really hoping to better understand like folks' lived experiences and what are the real community needs that drive local policy. So I moved to Chicago, did my master's at University of Chicago, and then worked in state advocacy and policy around the community mental health space. So I was doing lobbying for Medicaid to increase access to mental health. And I then left the kind of policy advocacy world to work for the Urban Institute, which is where I've been now for 3 years. Urban Institute is a nonprofit research organization based in Washington, D.C. I focus on translating research around the racial wealth gap and financial well-being. Pass it over to Josh.
All right. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with all of you. My name is Josh Lafazan. I am graduate of ILR 2016. I'm here because anything Anu and Ian and the folks over at ILR asked me to do, I'll always do, because truly a transformative time that I had at ILR, and my life would not be the same. I'm sure all my fellow panelists have the same feeling about Cornell. My professional experience is a little unique. So I actually ran for office and was elected my senior year of high school. So I got elected to my school board of education May of my senior year. I wanted to get involved in politics and government. Didn't think I was actually going to win. Just thought it would be a fun way to get involved in the community and make a difference. I ended up getting elected May of my senior year. So I promised my constituents I'd stay home, went to community college for 2 years, went to Cornell for 2 transformative years in ILR, then pursued my master's at Harvard in education policy, and I'm currently on the way to a doctorate at UPenn. So I've well-traveled, but serving on the school board in Syosset 2 terms. I came home to run for legislator, which is like our city council. So I always talk about young people running for office at the local level is a way you can not only make a difference, but win, right? It's very hard to run at the federal level or a state level, and you got to raise millions of dollars. But when I ran for the school board, I mean, we had no money. We would graffiti bed sheets with my name on them and hang them on fences because we were bootstrapped. So I got elected legislator in 2017, served for 3 terms. And now currently I do kind of my day job and my fun job. So my day job is I help lead Northwell Health, our corporate social responsibility. So CSR and ESG are oftentimes intertwined. So Northwell, 85,000 employees, largest private employer in the state. So I help lead our team to make sure we're taking care of our employees, taking care of the planet, and being a good corporate citizen. My fun job outside of my day job is I host the Josh Lafazan Show. So if any of you, want to look me up on YouTube, it's the Josh Lafazan Show. I could use a number of subscribers right now. My mom and my grandma are my 2 highest viewers, and then the third is my burner. But I do advocacy in the private sector with Northwell, and then of course in the public sector in the public square. So excited to talk to you guys all about whether getting involved in government or the private sector, how to make a difference, and excited to be here.
Awesome. So much knowledge here with these different panelists. I'm so grateful that you all agreed to speak to students. So thank you for sharing a little bit about yourselves, and we will definitely learn more as we go. So our next question is really about your motivation to pursue a career in this sector. So what drew you to pursue a career focused on social impact? Whether there was some specific moment or just something more broad, we'd love to hear what motivated you to do this in the first place.
Do we keep the order going? I don't want to jump in. Yeah, I'm originally from the Dominican Republic, and I immigrated here quite young, and so I've always gone back and forth to my home country, and so I've always wanted to do something to give back. I didn't know what I was going to do while during an undergrad at Cornell, I did economic sociology. I thought I wanted to do CSR because that seems to be a way. I'm going to couch that. I wanted to do something good, social impact, but I also wanted to survive and have a viable career that could also afford me a future where I could buy a home, etc. So I knew that I had to do good within some commercial aspect. And that's where I saw CSR, corporate social responsibility, as Josh just mentioned, being the way to go. When I got into the MPA program, I started taking classes at the ag school, rural development classes. And that's when they discussed microfinance. And microfinance is a way to have financial inclusion, particularly emerging markets. And so I wrote my master's thesis on microfinance in the Dominican Republic. And that led me toward investing within impact. Way back when, in 2009, impact investing was not a thing. So I had to carve now I know there's like a bunch of actual impact investing programs, but impact investing was not a thing. And I just sort of took a bunch of business school classes and development classes to create a degree in sort of impact. That's why that's why I was very, very lucky, I think, because it was such a small niche thing that I was able to get a job in impact and continue to stay in the sector.
No, but I think you make a good point about, kind of carving your own path. Maybe impact investing has become more established now, but there's always something new in this field and it's ever evolving. So if there are any students out there who are kind of like, oh, the exact degree niche that I want doesn't actually exist yet, take some electives in another department and kind of chart your own course, because there's always going to be something new that's slightly ahead of the curriculum curve. So feel free to take whatever feels like it will align and get you where you want to go. And you might just find yourself charting the course to a new slice of the sector. Did I see Claire unmute? Did you want to go next?
Yeah. I think the moment I remember is being a kid and my family and I were living abroad, and I saw a guy digging around in a trash can looking for something to eat, and I asked my dad why is he doing that? And he said, well, he's probably looking for something to eat. And I just remember being so shocked and horrified that, like, that's when I realized, I guess, inequality and struggles that people have. And from that point on, whenever I thought about what I wanted to do, it's like, well, if I'm gonna work for a living, I hope that it can be in some kind of way that to make the world a little bit of a better place somehow. But I flailed around a lot trying to figure out what that looked like. Volunteered in elementary school, was interested in education. I interned at nonprofits all over the map, like with totally different focuses, from women's rights to education, even American Psychological Association for a little bit. And I think I only really kind of focused in a little more on the sustainability. Actually, after the 2016 election, I had a bit of a moment where I realized what I was most concerned about over the next 4 years is the climate tipping points that we can't get back, and if we don't take action. So that's kind of been my journey to sort of narrowing in on a focus, but I think there's a lot of value in exploring different interests. And like I said, I went from that more of a nonprofit in my internship to seeking out more of a career in government, but I'm also now on the board of a nonprofit as a side thing. So I keep a foot in the nonprofit space as well. And I also did the SMART program at Cornell, and because I was also interested in international development, again, flailing around a lot, and kind of through that hands-on experience realized, at least for me, that my butt being the one in that particular seat wasn't added value, versus I met some people in Rwanda who had very similar background to me, but were Rwandan, so they had the actual cultural knowledge. So kind of a realization there.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say that's flailing at all, Claire. I think that's actually a beautiful story of exploration and figuring out what your lane is, so to speak, in this work. Not only what topic you're interested in, but also what sector you want to do that in and what your role is. Do you want to be a boots on the ground person? Or are you more of a policy behind the scenes data person? Everyone is needed, right? So sometimes it takes us a moment to find exactly what our spot is, or maybe that evolves over the course of your career, and that's totally normal. So thanks for sharing your journey of figuring that out. Not flailing at all. Love it.
And I did talk to a lot of alum too, I will say. I'm sure people tell you to do that a lot, but I +1 for that, because it helps me explore what it would look like. Like I talked to a Williams alum who worked at the ACLU and Nature Conservancy, so it helped me see like what what life inside different organizations might look like.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. I think I saw Miranda, maybe.
Yeah, I can jump in here. This is like low-key a tough question. Mostly because I think I still am like, oh, social impact, that is what I do, but it wasn't ever like a formal like field of work, I would say, that I was aware of growing up or even while I was at Cornell. I think but it was always kind of the work I knew I wanted to do. So there's a number of things that drove me to this work, starting with just the way I grew up. I was the first person in my family, the first of my siblings to pursue a bachelor's degree, let alone a university like Cornell. And so with that, there was just a lot that I wanted to get out of my experience, but also like came with a lot of reflections of like, oh, my life and my upbringing was so different from many of the people I was exposed to and shared rooms with and classes with at Cornell. So it was just like a lot of ahas and awareness of the greater social issues in the world that we all live within. But I also say the thing that brought me to Cornell above any other program in the first place was just like this curiosity and inquiry to understand human life and human behavior, which is like probably exactly why I ended up at human ecology studying human development. But it was all of those things that like inspired my academic courses that I took. That is also what continues to inspire the careers I pursue. So really wanting to understand how humans develop and behave in the way that they do at a scientific level, and then really exploring from the policy analysis management standpoint of my education, what are the things in people's built environments that really influence their ability to successfully develop, successfully in quotations, but to pursue and reach opportunities that they might aspire to from a young age. So that I think is what as I was taking courses, I didn't know what job title I was going to have, which I think drove like my family nuts. They're like, you're going to Cornell. What do you mean you're not going to be a lawyer or a doctor? But I didn't have a job title in my head that I was like, this is what I'm going to school to be. But that's also really exciting. It's intimidating, but it's exciting because there isn't like one job title that fits the social impact world. But I just knew what were the populations, the types of change that I wanted to make for certain demographics. And then I bumped around a bit, and you find the things as you go through different experiences that really speak to you. So kind of what Claire was saying, like having conversations, exploring different organizations. I do that even still to this day. And I'm like, that sounds cool. I want to get involved in that. And then continuing to build on that and question what fits you, what doesn't. I think is what drew me to this type of career and what continues to make me want to be a part of the social impact field.
Yeah, I'm gonna shameless plug to the workshop that we have coming up on Wednesday, because Miranda mentioned, kind of not knowing exactly what job title you are looking for or how much that can vary within this sector. And there's lots of other both websites and like filtering strategies to use on LinkedIn to find some of these types of positions. So I'll dive more into that on Wednesday if you want to come to the workshop, but that will be recorded too and posted if you can't make it. So yeah, that mystery of what exactly is the job title I'm pursuing is not an uncommon struggle. So we'll talk more about it, and I'll pass this last one to Josh.
Sure. I mean, to echo what's been said, I think thinking back, is now like we're taking a trip down memory lane here. I still don't know what I wanted. I just turned 31. I don't know what I want to do when I grow up, and I think that's okay. And I think high school and college, there's such a dichotomy, because in high school you're told you got to know what major you want to take, you got to know what you want to do, and then in college they're like, actually you shouldn't know, right? So to me, like my approach was, what could I do to give myself options later in my life, for my whole life? Because Ian Shackner at Cornell said to me, because I was 20 years old and I thought my life was over because I didn't know what I was going to do. And he's like, when people say life is short, like that's good in the movies, but in actuality, life is really long, right? And so what can you do now to give yourself options later in life? And it completely changed my perspective, right? And so what I wanted to do was give myself the broadest amount of experience academically, professionally, personally, to preserve my options later in life. So for example, I kind of break it down into 3 areas. So academically, I wanted to preserve what I wanted to do. So ILR, I chose because I really didn't know what I wanted to do, but I wanted to have the broadest set of skills. So I love that ILR teaches you about, human relations, negotiation, bargaining, leadership, all of that. I went to Harvard. I got my degree in education policy and management. I loved education. I love learning, and I wanted to dive deeper into that field. And I'm getting my doctorate at UPenn in business management and in leadership. Nothing to do with what I studied in my undergrad or in my graduate. So academically, I always said to myself, and I should have gotten a minor, but I transferred it and I was too late / lazy to do that. But what can you do academically to give yourself the broadest ability to have a skill set to do whatever you want to do? And then that's one. I say academic is one. Two is of course in the public sector. I think so much of my life's been dedicated to helping out in the public sector, and you do not have to serve in elected office by any means to make a difference in the public sector. So what can you do to get involved, whether it's a nonprofit or whether it's working on a political cause or a charitable cause? What can you do to get involved in the community? Figure out what part of public life you want to get involved in. I think it's tantamount to being a good citizen is we all get involved in something in public life, because I think it's part of living in this great country that we have to give back and make a difference, whether you're making money on it or not. I just think everyone should get involved publicly in something. And then, of course, in the private sector, right? People, everyone wants to make money later in life. I didn't make a dime until I was 25. Right. I lived as cheap as I could. I refereed basketball and I refereed soccer, and I took these odd jobs because I wanted to work for free, right? I wanted to help make a difference. So like, you don't have to have it figured out today, but looking in the private sector and where can you find the intersection between what you're good at and what you like, right? People always say, follow your passion. I add the caveat, find the intersection between what you like and what you're good at. And if you could find that intersection in the private sector, there's plenty of opportunities to make money in these roles. And the last thing I'll say, and I'll stop there, is I have a lot of friends who are making a lot more money than I am, and I'm a lot happier now. And it's been funny to see many of my friends quit their jobs and try to have me plug them into what I'm doing at Northwell, which is corporate social responsibility, because you have to find what makes you happy. But I just think for all my friends who listen to the typical go from ILR, go to Wall Street, which is the pipeline or whatever it is, so many of my friends are now coming into work in a specific area of impact. So I'll say just follow your heart, and anyone who tells you have to have it figured out at this age is being disingenuous. And everyone at Cornell who told me it was okay that I didn't know what I wanted to do actually was right. And at the wise age of 31, take it from me, you have so much life left to live.
Thanks, Josh. I'm glad you felt like we were wise to tell you that in the first place. And actually a great kind of segue to our next question. Partially because I do see lots of alumni in my role who either started in social impact and are pivoting one way or vice versa. So it's very common for people to reevaluate as they go throughout their career. But our next question is about that kind of decision about sectors. So you don't even necessarily all have to answer this if you feel like someone else covers it, but based on your knowledge working in or being exposed to collaborating with different sectors, how would you compare working in government, nonprofits versus socially responsible private companies? What are some of the differences, or how did you decide which one to work in?
Yeah, so I've worked, I think, in all three. During Cornell, I had an internship in what's now called the DCF. It was called OPIC at the time. So the DCF is the, I don't know what DCF stands for because it was called OPIC, Overseas Private Investment Corporation. So I think it's the Development Corporation and Finance of the U.S. It's the U.S. investment, U.S. government's investment into international markets. I went to the Port Authority after graduating, and that's a government. So federal government to state government, or it's like a public agency. It's sponsored by 2 states, but still funded by 2 states. Then I've worked for private asset managers, and I've also worked for an asset manager sponsored by a nonprofit. For me, working at this federal agency, interning, I was there during 2008, and that's when Russia decided to invade Georgia. It's really interesting how history repeats itself. So Russia invaded Georgia in 2008, and at that time they placed sanctions on any Russian investments from the US. And my huge project for that entire summer was an SME finance project in Russia. And I felt like me as a lowly intern, I had just placed all of my hopes and all of my dreams on my very first deal. It was a big deal for me, and it just went to nothing. It just evaporated like nothing. And I just vowed never to work for government ever again, because it all seemed a little arbitrary. It all seemed very, it just seemed arbitrary. I was like, I don't ever want to be put in this position. I also felt like there were very, very smart people there, but they also made use of a lot of private sector consultants for specialized work. And reading consultant type things, I realized I want to be a consultant that provides the kind of work to be used by government. I was always trying to sort of search for the more commercial. I personally don't like huge organizations. I like small teams. Then I graduated and went to work for the Port Authority that Claire works in right now. That was also a very large organization. I was in a very small program. It was a rotation program. And when I was there in 08 and 09, no, in 09, 10, we were trying to build the tunnel. So the Penn Station that you guys see today, huge Moynihan Station, was just a thought back then. And so it was I was doing the whole budget for that. I don't know how, but I was managing that Excel. It was a massive, massive $10 billion project. Chris Christie, who was the governor of New Jersey at the time, had a tiff. They were just political, and he decided to cancel it. And I was working with all these engineers, and I remember they found out they lost all their jobs watching Chris Christie make a speech about how this budget didn't contain contingencies. And I knew this budget was I knew it back in my hand. And he was saying all these things about the budget that I knew were not true. And so I just became very jaded. And so I was like, I thought that I could be, but there's all these local politics, right? So it's not just national politics, there's local politics can also affect things. So I'm sorry, I'm very jaded on that. So that's when I was like, okay, this was also my baby. So strike two. It doesn't happen to everyone, but I think it's me. It's the curse. So so it's just a very large organization. I've since worked for asset managers where it's like a team of 6 or 8, and it's much harder. It's you do everything, but you know everything. It's like a startup environment. That's what I personally like. And you sort of eat what you kill kind of thing. So it's got a very private sector mindset, but we all know that we're doing it for a certain social cause. That's where I like to be. I don't necessarily think impact means you have to. I have a vision that if you tell people with money that helping people will make them money, they are more likely to want to do it. And that's just human nature. You can try to get them to say that it's going to make them feel good and it's going to save someone from a bad situation, which are all true things. But there's an audience for everything. And if you tell them that they get to tell their Gen Z kids that they're investing in a really cool thing, but also it's not going to hurt their portfolio while they're doing it, that's the story I tell, because at the end of the day, those, unfortunately, the people who hold the most wealth in this country speak that language. That's the unfortunate piece, but so I tend to gravitate toward the private sector that works to do well at the same time.
I was playing around with thinking about these trade-offs a lot while I was at Cornell, and some of the experiences I remember very strongly were one of my bosses at one of my nonprofit jobs mentioned to me that he was bartending on the weekends to make ends meet in DC, and that really stuck with me. Like, you're who I'm aspiring to be, and they're not paying you enough to live in DC. So I don't want to generalize, but I definitely noticed that the job offers that were coming to me through SEPA, or the job postings that were coming to me through the MPA program, were like requiring a master's degree and $35,000 a year. And I was so shocked, because who can live on that even in 2017, you know? So that's kind of when I started looking more at government jobs, honestly, was I simply couldn't see how I could make it work. Or if I could, I knew there's a lot of background noise in your head when you're trying to make ends meet. So honestly, it was a money thing for me, looking more at government jobs, and the offers that I had at CFPB were only 25 or 30 grand more, but made a difference in just being able to scrape together a living that was somewhat enjoyable in New York versus really, really struggling. And also I noticed some of the nonprofits that I was interviewing with were like interviewing me on a weekend, and the founders there on a Saturday morning, and culture's important. The benefits that I saw in the nonprofits that I interned with were my bosses were really doing a lot, like marketing, event planning, project management for building transferable skills in a small team in a dynamic environment. You're getting a lot of experience. And one of the opportunities I considered after undergrad was also the Vista program, because you really get a lot of meaningful experience right up front, although you do have to go on food stamps and stuff. So there's a lot to weigh there. But the stability and the pension and being able to make ends meet. My dad's a pension guy. He's like, my God, in this world, if you can get a job with a pension, go for it. Certainly things maybe look a little different now, but those were some of the things that I weighed about that nonprofit versus public.
Yeah, and you make a good point too, Claire, about government work. I think some people view government work as like not paid as well. And certainly you can make more in a corporate setting, but you can also make a pretty decent living on a government pay scale, and the pension stability feels really abstract when you first start, but it's really, my partner works for local government, so I can attest to that piece too, that it's enough. You're not going to be living lavishly, but you're not going to be scraping by quite like the salaries that you were previously offered. So I do want to give Miranda a chance to talk about her nonprofit life, and hopefully provide another perspective to this to round us out here.
Yeah, this is a great question because there are so many different ways to do social impact world. I've worked for a number of different types of nonprofits. I think that's something also to keep in mind is like, I think Claire is talking a lot about, seems like grassroots organizations where it is a small team, shoestring budget, and that is like the struggle bus. But in exchange, there's so much reward. So I think it's important to keep in mind around like, what are you willing to do for, like, when is the juice worth the squeeze type of thing. But then there's other nonprofits, like the nonprofit I work for now is larger, does get a lot of funding and resources from different federal and corporate, like there's just different types of nonprofits. And so you can explore those, but I'd also say like I was somebody who was up for the struggle in the early years of my career, and the amount of skills that I was able to develop to then set myself up for bigger roles and responsibilities that came with more of the financial reward did come later on, but it was definitely the grind at the beginning of my career that I fully think was really worth it. The other thing I just wanted to know about different sectors, because I've worked in city government, I've worked in state policy and nonprofit. One thing that I think is really different across these sectors is who the stakeholders are. So when you're thinking about the pathways of creating change, you're always going to have a different audience, and you're going to have different stakeholders who you're accountable to, who you enjoy working with, or who you don't enjoy working with. And so that's something that I would just keep in mind as you think about how do organizations or companies or different elements of the sector go about creating change. Are they accountable to their city residents? Are they accountable to the members and clients of the organization that they do direct service through? Is it legislators at the state level who you then have to think about all of the politics in place? For me, I hated politics, so I left working in state policy. Or is it funders? And so right now I'm in a role where a lot of the folks that we're accountable to, or the corporate or federal funders that fund the work that we do. And then in addition to the stakeholders is like, what is the levers of change? Are you creating change through what I call big P policy? So like a piece of legislation, or a little P policy, like creating and funding a new program at the local level? Or is it through impact investing or informing folks' decision-making and voting power? So those are just other ways that you think about how different elements of the sector go about creating change. And those may or may not speak to you and can help you think about which lane you enjoy most.
Yeah, thanks everyone. For the sake of time, I'm going to go on to our next question because I want to make sure that students have a chance to chime in too. So I've seen some of the Q&A. Feel free to keep it coming. But I'll let Josh go first for this next one at least. There have been a variety of questions in the registration about this in terms of, skills to develop or someone who doesn't have a lot of experience yet, maybe skills that helped you grow in your career, but even just big picture, what advice do you have for students who are looking to enter government, nonprofits, or mission-driven private sector roles?
Sure. So, I mean, relationships are everything. I can't tell you how many jobs get filled that never get posted, right? Especially in politics and government, so many jobs are word of mouth. And so, being young, you have so much opportunity to meet everyone. So are you going to things that are free? Like there's so many, and on campus is great. So I can't tell you, I actually pipelined a couple kids from Cornell into government jobs that were my year, just that I met. And I was a transfer student, so I only had 2 years. So going to everything that you can with an open mind. And it's funny because when I say networking, my parents' generation, for them, networking was like in the stuffy room, like in the back of a restaurant, everyone's handing out business cards. Networking is really just meeting people. And so if you think of networking not as an obligation, but as an opportunity to connect with cool people from all different walks of life, and somehow to me, I mean, social media is the easiest thing, right? Everyone I meet, I try to add on social media because we'll keep in touch even if we don't speak. And so growing that list of folks in your life, and then for example, if you're interested, like going to, I was interested in government, so going to functions, going to campaign kickoffs, going to rallies, going to hear speakers. Like there's so much you can do. And you're young, so I started when I put an email list together when I was 17 years old. Right, by the time I was 26, I had thousands of people on that list of people I met just by accident because you have the benefit at times. So relationships are everything. Otherwise, skills to develop that definitely help. Public speaking was the best skill I developed. There are so many free tools you can take. Everything you do, you're going to have to speak in front of a room, whether it's 3 people or 3,000. And so getting comfortable public speaking, I took persuasive speaking at Cornell actually as a senior. So it's relationships, public speaking, and then the last and most important skill that I think I've developed was persistence, because I can't tell you how many obstacles like I've had to overcome just in my political career. And so I mean, there are books you can read, but I think if you can develop a skill set around persistence, because so many people end up failing at the first roadblock. And so many of the young people I mentor and I speak to oftentimes get frustrated at one roadblock that they can't overcome. You're going to have so many in your life. So if you're somebody who is interested in learning about perseverance, learning about persistence, it's the best skill I can tell you all. And it's the one thing I see for many of the young people I mentor, that oftentimes they want to quit when, in my opinion, things haven't even gotten hard. And so if you can persevere, I can't, ironically, and thank goodness this happened to me. I thought I was going to Columbia as an undergrad, got rejected, and I got into Cornell. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me, right? Because of everyone I met and whatnot. But like, oftentimes someone doesn't get into a college, and you guys are all super smart because you got into Cornell, and you didn't have to get elected to your school board to get in. So you guys are all super smart, but there's going to be so many obstacles you're going to have. So network, meet every single person you can meet with an open mind of, I'm meeting you not as a transaction. I'm meeting you because you're a cool person and I want to grow my network. Public speaking, find a class, find an online course, do something to find public speaking, and read or have a mantra or affirmations or whatever you can do. If you can public speak, if you can network and you have perseverance, I promise you, you can do literally anything. I promise you.
Can I add something to what Josh just shared about relationships? Because kudos to you, Josh, but networking is like, gives me the EBGBs. But it's also like, I would say like my superpower is relationships, like is stakeholder management. But for me, it's not being like, I wish I was, but it like, even I'm like blushing just like thinking about like the formal word networking. So other ways if you're like me and don't have Josh's superpower, if you have experiences, whether it's through classes, internships, and jobs, building relationships, real relationships with other people at your office or in your company that aren't necessarily your supervisor or your other intern, but building those relationships. And then once you leave and go to another role, maintaining those in whatever way it is. And like, I just think having a personal rapport with people, they'll always remember you. And then if something comes across their desk, they'll reach out. Or then if you do end up going to a conference and you feel so awkward and uncomfortable, but you see somebody you knew before, makes the whole thing just like better. So I wanted to throw that out there. And then another skill that I think many of us have just being at a school like Cornell is language. And so I would say in social impact work, especially today's environment, the role of narrative change and case making and making the case why something matters in the world or why an investor or a stakeholder should care about something you're doing. And so being able to help inform narrative change with the power of language and all of the intelligence that we possess because of what we've gained at Cornell is the other skill that I would say that you all have and should hone for this work.
Yeah, language and storytelling for sure. Even thinking about just writing cover letters. I think those matter so much more in this sector than maybe others because they want to know why you're motivated. They want to know your story of why you care about this topic area. So great. I see some questions in the chat and a couple others from registration that maybe we can work in unless either of the other two ladies want to chime in anything on this one or we can move on.
Plus one to all of that, I just also add one thing I think Cornell excels at that I didn't find as much opportunity to do at my undergrad is practicums and the kind of opportunities to really resume build. Like I mentioned the SMART program, but I also did like the SEPA practicum where we were doing a consulting project for a local nonprofit. The impact investing practicum we advised like the Walton Family Foundation. There was opportunity to join like the Johnson Social Impact practicum and so many opportunities on campus to like build out that resume. So I had a whole section by the time I graduated of like student consulting experience where I had worked with different organizations on different projects. And also things that some of my classmates did that I thought were really smart was I had a friend who worked at the local or the Cornell Sustainability Center. So by the time she graduated, she had like 2 years worth of work experience in sustainability. And I also had some classmates who worked at a local startup accelerator. So I think internships are great, but there's a lot of great ways in campus to build out that resume, especially if you're kind of running up against, sometimes it can be hard entering the job market without full-time work experience, but those things really helped.
Yeah, I think those class projects too are something that Cornell students sometimes undervalue or don't realize that is more unique about their experience here. So even those kind of fake consultations that you do as part of a class project are something you can put on your resume. So yeah, great point there about you can develop experience and own even what you do in clubs and classes on your resume. It doesn't have to be paid to make it to your resume. So great. Okay, I'm going to shift us to our last kind of registration fueled but pre-planned question and keep them coming in the chat and Q&A box wherever is comfortable for you, or you can raise your hand and we'll unmute after this one. But this one's a little more timely given the current climate. So with the uncertainty happening right now in government hiring and potential funding challenges for some nonprofits, how do you see the landscape of social impact careers and evolving, or how can students kind of plan for some of this evolution given the current landscape?
I think that it's very unfortunate that certain things are controversial, but we all have to operate within the context. So I would say that one good thing I've seen since I graduated with impact investing was all about microfinance for like the first 7 years, maybe 10 years, and then climate, environmental impact, healthcare impact has become more prominent. So things that are not controversial currently are still infrastructure, clean water. I know climate can be quite controversial still. Something that saved me throughout various different bumps in the past in my career is the fact that my exposure was diversified, meaning if you know, the US market was tumbling. My fund was focused in Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. If something was happening in India, you know, we still had Latin America to worry about, you know. So I would say the US is not the center of the world as much as it feels like it is sometimes, with everything happening. The world is a lot bigger than what's going on here. And I think it's safe to say that what's happening here hopefully is an anomaly in the world. It's not a trend. There's some trends, but my point is that yes, if you are going into government, I think unfortunately that becomes more concentrated. But I think I don't want to keep hyping on the private sector, but I think it's less whims based, and I would say try to diversify as much as you can in what you're exposed to, because every few years every country does something terrible, and it's, you know, you can't help that. So the only really thing you can do is maintain as Josh mentioned, a good network, but also a robust set of experiences that you can lean on when one of your expertises maybe turns into a dead end. And also lean into what you are, what your own personal superpower is. So, you know, I was when I graduated, like I said, there's no social impact. And so I was an MPA in a sea of MBAs, Harvard Business Schools, Columbia, and my master's didn't seem to be the same weight as theirs just because we're doing investing. So I took the CFA exam and certification. And so I just continued to grind, and I was a lowly analyst, even though I had a master's. And that's just how it was. And so I was like, hey, I'm fluent in Spanish. Does your Latin America team need help? And, you know, you sort of lean into what your strengths are. But I think the theme of the night is resilience. And you just have to continue to hit, you know, you're going to hit a wall. You're going to hit we're all going to Cornell, and it's not going to be enough. Unfortunately, you have to continuously get up. No one's going to sort of come into your apartment and give you a job. You have to really be hungry for it and continue. You have everything you need. You know, that's not the case. It's just, you have to know that it's probably not going to be enough to get someone's attention. You have to continuously go out there and network and find new niches for yourself.
Yeah, that self-advocacy piece of like, I have this skill set, you know, can I use my language skills in another department is, yeah, people are constantly doing that and evolving their careers. Other people want to chime in on this kind of current landscape type question?
It's tough. And I will say, so I think there are certain states that may still want to lead on some issues. Like my organization is still committed to net zero. I think we may see states like California, New York take more of a role on the national stage, and leading on that more state and local, I think, becomes more important in this kind of context. I will say, like, I think in this kind of volatile environment, like that peer-to-peer support is going to be really important. So I leaned a lot on my classmates who had the same interests as me and were also really grinding hard to find a job. Like, I just talked to this alum, and I think you should talk to him because you're interested in this. Like, pull close with your community, and people who want to do similar work as you. Recognize that folks like us, honestly, who haven't been looking for a job in this particular environment are going to have a very different experience. I think sometimes I've gotten the best advice from someone who is just like 1 year ahead of me in life for that next exact step. And I think honestly, going back to what Josh said about finding a way to contribute, like do what you got to do to survive right now. There is a lot of ways that you can stand up and make a difference. That can look a lot of different ways. I would take care of yourself first and find a way to give back that works in the context of this really volatile and difficult environment.
Yeah, it's always evolving. So what you do now doesn't necessarily have to be what you do forever. That kind of ties into the question from the chat too of, yes, you can build a career within a single company, but plenty of people move around throughout their career, as you've seen all these panelists share. So what you do now, or those of you who are seniors, first starting after graduation, doesn't have to be your forever thing if it doesn't feel like the perfect fit and it's just a convenient option right now. That's okay too. But yeah, definitely some opportunity at state level things. If anyone wants to ask a question out loud, feel free to use the raise hand feature. Otherwise, I'll let someone else answer this question too if Miranda or Josh had further. Yeah, Ben, do you want to ask something new?
Yeah, thanks so much, and thank you all for being here. I appreciate you taking the time. It's been really cool to hear what you have to say because I feel particularly drawn to social impact. I related to a lot of what you guys talked about, those core values. And Miranda, I actually reached out to Urban Institute last summer. I spent the semester in DC. Did not end up working with you guys, but it seemed like a really cool opportunity. Where I feel like I'm leaning is more of the kind of international nonprofits, and I'm curious if you guys had anything to say about that scene and what it looks like to prepare yourself or to work with the United Nations or the World Health Organization or things like that.
Yeah, I would say those are very large organizations and it's quite bureaucratic. Um, when so networking helps in that regard. And I think with those very large international organizations, networking maybe has a smaller piece to it because you still have to get thrown into the grinder of it. But in terms of security and stability, that's where you want to be because it does encapsulate that sort of diversity of exposure. I would say those programs, because they're so structured, it's always important to join the pipeline of where they go. They often look at Peace Corps as a pipeline to those kinds of very large programs, like other programs that look like them. So other large programs that maybe have a lower threshold to enter are feeder to those. So something like a Peace Corps is something that you can go to and then it tends to have more connection. The earlier you do it, the better. If you have an internship, I think it's much better. So I would start at the lower thresholds. But no, I would say very bureaucratic, right? So you should sort of be that kind of person who prefers that stability and is okay with a very structured, but stable, which is not a bad, in this environment, not a bad place to be.
I think I saw, yeah, Dominic, you had your hand up.
Hi. Oh, yeah. Thank you all for taking the time to speak with us today. I really appreciate it. And Josh, I'm also a proud Long Islander, so I'm a big fan of yours. Follow you on Instagram. As someone who's very passionate about the legislative process and that kind of stuff, what advice would you give for someone who's trying to land a Hill internship for the summer or possibly post-grad as a career?
Yeah, I can take that one. So because I worked on the Hill for a summer, but not in a legislative office. I actually worked for the Surgeon General in her community outreach office. But what I'll say is, if you want to work on the Hill, reaching out now, you're talking about this summer, I'm assuming, reaching out now to where on the island are you?
I'm in the 1st congressional district, so Nickelodeon is my representative.
Okay, so reaching out now, getting on the radar for the Hill. But I'll tell you something that I did in interning locally. You might even be able to make a bigger impact. Obviously, if you want to intern on the Hill, you have me on Instagram. If I can help, shoot me a DM. When you apply, I'll absolutely put in a word with the office. But so many of my friends ended up having better experiences locally with elected officials on the local level than they did in DC. They felt in DC you were one of so many, and you didn't really have face time with the elected official, but locally you were able to really ingratiate yourself. And locally, that's how so many of those jobs get filled if you want to get involved in government. And I'll say this, I have a number of friends who live in DC and they enjoy working on the Hill, but they they aren't as influential as they are at the local level. So for example, my interns actually help me write legislation, where interns on the Hill, oftentimes you're answering phones and doing more kind of community outreach stuff. So I'd say, yes, it's more attractive to work on in federal government sometimes, but locally you can make a big difference. But if the Hill's where you want to be, when you apply, shoot me a DM. I'll 100% put in a good word for you.
Appreciate it.
And there are still, if you don't already subscribe, for those who don't know, there's a House and Senate bulletin that goes out via email every week. And there are still internships and full-time jobs being posted in there. Granted, maybe a little bit less than usual, but definitely still plenty of options. So feel free to subscribe to that if you don't already. I don't think I'm double checking to see if there's other questions, or raise your hand if I missed you. I think that's everybody. Panelists, was there anything else that you were itching to say that didn't make it into one of our questions? I have a last call for words of wisdom. Yeah, Miranda.
I have a final thought that I think builds on a couple of questions and definitely what Josh was just sharing about the importance of local work, but also like local geographically, but also like local really with communities. Like if there's a particular policy issue or topic that you care deeply about, having real exposure to those issues on the ground is so valuable. Whether, like I said, whether that's like personally close to it or geographically. So I'll just share, like the Urban Institute, for example, has almost always been like a DC based organization because a lot of our work has been federally funded. Because of the pandemic, they started to allow staff to work outside of DC. I was one of those few silver lining of COVID that was able to work remotely. And we've seen because I'm in Rochester, because I'm close to like what's happening locally. When I started at Urban, I was in Chicago, but having that perspective on the ground of what's happening outside of a place like DC has been paramount to the company. And now they've opened up their policy for hiring because they've seen the value of it. So I just want to note, like with the tight job market potentially, especially around government jobs, being able to build skills and experiences on the ground in local communities can be a really good way to set yourself up, not only for future jobs, but really to have meaningful impact in your future career.
Yeah, +1 to all of that. And I dropped a link in the chat to local events and climate stuff in New York newsletter that I go to events from. I'm also a member of Young Professionals in Transportation and Young Professionals in Infrastructure. So I think engaging with groups that are already, like Miranda said, engaged with issues that you care about locally is a great way to meet people and get involved. I think one other thing is that I'll say is in this difficult environment, I think if you're really called to something, there's a lot of value in starting your own thing too. I've gotten a lot of joy and meaning out of being a board member on the Solar Water Project, which is the nonprofit that I'm on the board of, which was started by an undergrad friend of mine from Pakistan who wanted to bring clean water to his village and just kind of bootstrapped it. And we're still kind of bootstrapping it, but now we have like employees on the ground in Pakistan, which is amazing. And I've gotten to go to Pakistan and South Sudan and been there for the deployment of solar powered wells. So that goes back to the connections and just meeting people who are aligned with what you care about. But also it doesn't have to be your full-time job to bring you a lot of meaning and joy. And there's a lot of ways to get involved, especially now.
Yeah, it doesn't always have to be your full-time thing. I think sometimes people combine what they do for pay and what they do outside of that to find fulfillment. I know I do some local community organizing too, and Claire being on boards, and yeah, lots of different things that folks do. So definitely find the combo that works for you. And if you need help finding what that combo is, feel free to reach out to myself or any of the career coaches in your college office, or one of our lovely panelists. If something that they said resonated with you, you should have their LinkedIn profiles in your email already, but we'll send out some of these additional links as well after the session. So I wanted to say thank you again to all of the panelists for sharing so much great information. Thank you to Anu for keeping the chat links coming with all the different resources and events coming up. So like I said, this is the first of our week of events, and hopefully I'll see some of you on Wednesday for the workshop online, or next week on Tuesday, we'll be in biotech for some networking if you wanted to practice that public speaking and networking that some of our panelists were talking about tonight. You can go ahead and register for those as well. But thank you all so much for coming and asking some great questions. A lot of them through registration, so we were able to incorporate those ahead of time. So thank you so much, and thanks again for our panelists. Give them a nice virtual round of applause. Thank you so much, everyone.
And if folks can complete